I never imagined that a rumor born when I was only 14 would twist my entire life into a direction I could not have predicted, yet every decision I make today can be traced back to that single moment. My name is Mallory, a photographer who owns a small but respected studio in Atlanta, and people often assume I must have grown up in a warm and supportive home. The truth could not be further from that picture. I was not planning to revisit what happened in my early teens, yet everything resurfaced the morning my parents contacted me after more than a decade of silence. They wrote as if the past had been nothing more than an unpleasant misunderstanding, a phase everyone should simply move on from. But all I could remember was a night when I was told to pack my things and step outside, without a single chance to defend myself. The most surreal part was what they said when we finally spoke again. I expected anger or guilt, or even awkward small talk. Yet the first sentence I heard was a line that froze me in place. My mother said, the first thing they said wasn't congratulations or sorry, it was a demand for money. That single moment reminded me of everything I had survived to build the life I have now. They claimed they needed my help, yet they never asked what had really happened to a 14-year-old girl who lost her home in one night. They never asked why I never came back. Before I continue, if you have ever rebuilt yourself after being dismissed or doubted by the people who should have protected you, consider staying with me till the end of this story and subscribing, so you do not miss the moments that shaped the person I became. Before everything collapsed, the cracks inside my family had been there far longer than anyone wanted to admit. I grew up watching subtle differences in the way my parents reacted to the two of us, and although no one said it out loud, I understood early that my place in the household did not resemble hers. My sister Sabrina entered every room expecting praise, and rarely left without receiving it, while I learned to keep my excitement quiet because attention often brought commentary that drained the joy from whatever I had been proud of. The distance between us widened each year, not from any dramatic fight, but from the repetition of small moments that taught me exactly where I stood. My interest in photography started when I borrowed an old point-and-shoot camera from a neighbor during an end-of-summer gathering. I remember how alive I felt when I captured expressions that told stories better than anything I could have said, yet my parents insisted that creative interests lacked stability and should remain a hobby. Sabrina watched the way I carried that camera around the house and responded with a smile that felt too deliberate, as if she had discovered something she believed she could twist to her advantage. She did not attack me directly, yet she often slid comments into conversations that made my parents question whether I was becoming distracted from school or from responsibilities at home. The first adult who truly recognized how much photography mattered to me was my mentor, Mrs. Keaton, who taught an elective art class at my middle school. She noticed how I lingered after each lesson and eventually asked if I wanted to help her organize equipment after hours. I agreed without hesitation, and those afternoons became the only time of day when I felt genuinely seen. Keaton offered guidance on lighting, framing, and perspective, yet what stayed with me most was the way she never dismissed the things I cared about. Her encouragement shaped the way I viewed myself far more than anything I heard at home. Sabrina reacted quickly to the shift in my confidence. She questioned why Keaton spent so much time around me and suggested to my parents that I might be receiving special treatment that I did not deserve. Whenever I returned from school in a good mood, Sabrina acted surprised and asked whether something unusual had happened, as if my happiness required justification. Those moments created friction that grew heavier with time, especially when she noticed that teachers had begun sharing positive feedback about my work. Rather than celebrate with me, she acted as if each compliment given to me removed something from her. I tried to ignore the tension, hoping that my parents would eventually understand that photography did not pull me away from responsibility, but helped me make sense of the world. Instead, their reactions sharpened whenever Sabrina pointed out minor mistakes in my chores or mentioned that I spent too much time with Keaton in the art room. My parents never confronted me aggressively during that period, yet their questions revealed an uneasiness they rarely directed toward Sabrina. I sensed that they were watching for evidence that I might be drifting into behavior they considered concerning, even though nothing in my life supported that idea. The imbalance shaped the rhythm of our home. Sabrina grew more performative, seeking validation with a confidence that felt rehearsed, while I moved quietly through each day, hoping to avoid another comparison that I had no chance of winning. I kept practicing photography despite their doubts, and those early choices prepared me for the events that would eventually transform everything I knew about family loyalty and the consequences of being misunderstood. Autumn arrived with a quiet shift that I felt before I understood, and the season carried the moment when everything began to tilt in a direction I could not have stopped. Sabrina approached me one evening with a smile that looked polished rather than natural, and although she said nothing overtly hostile, her tone suggested that she had discovered a new role that placed her at the center of attention. I noticed her watching my reactions more closely during those weeks, almost as if she was rehearsing the story she wanted others to believe. The first sign of trouble appeared when a cousin avoided my greeting during a family gathering, which confused me because we had never shared tension before. Later that night, I overheard a conversation about a rumor that involved my behavior at school, something vague enough to evolve as it traveled, yet specific enough to unsettle the adults who heard it. I did not realize yet that Sabrina had planted the story with careful intention, shaping it to portray me as someone who sought trouble when left unsupervised. The phrasing matched patterns she often used when she wanted to claim innocence while guiding others toward a particular conclusion. Within days, teachers began watching me with a level of caution that I had not seen directed at me previously, and their questions implied that they believed something had changed in my attitude. I tried to explain that nothing unusual had happened yet. Their expressions remained tense whenever my name appeared in conversation. I could sense how the rumor gained momentum faster than logic could slow it, and my attempts to remain calm looked suspicious to people who already formed opinions about me. Each misunderstanding reinforced the next, creating a cycle that tightened around my reputation. Sabrina escalated the situation by presenting what she called evidence, a series of printed screenshots she claimed to have discovered on a shared device. At first glance, the messages looked alarming, yet the uneven formatting revealed that they were created through edits rather than genuine conversation. She brought them to Mom as if she had been protecting the household from a threat only she had detected, and Mom's face shifted from confusion to concern as she examined each page. I could feel the distance forming in her posture before she even spoke a word to me. Dad confronted me later that night with a tone that suggested he believed he had reached an unavoidable conclusion. He held the printed messages with a firmness that implied he feared losing control of the situation if he relaxed his grip. When I tried to explain that the screenshots were fabricated, he interrupted me with a question that struck deeper than he realized. Dad said, "Why would your sister lie about something like this?" And I knew immediately that my voice no longer held the same weight as hers in his mind. His eyes carried disappointment that felt predetermined rather than earned. The shift in their behavior became more pronounced as days passed. Mom observed me silently whenever I walked into the room, her expression uncertain, as if she questioned details of my life she had never bothered to examine. Dad attempted to pair patience with suspicion, asking questions that were framed as concern, but delivered with doubt. Sabrina behaved as though she had taken on a protective role within the family, offering comments that appeared helpful, yet subtly reinforced the narrative she had created. I tried to focus on schoolwork and photography, hoping that the truth would eventually rise above confusion. Instead, the rumor grew into a story that people retold with confidence, as if their belief in it granted it validity. It became difficult to separate who I was from what others assumed, and the imbalance deepened cracks that had been invisible to me only months earlier. I sensed that the pressure within our household was building toward an inevitable turning point, one that would alter everything I understood about trust, loyalty, and the cost of being misinterpreted. A late evening at the end of the month shifted the tone inside our home in a way I had never felt before. I had been in my room finishing homework when my parents called me downstairs with voices that carried an unusual weight, and although they said nothing specific, I understood that something irreversible waited below. I walked into the living room and saw my mother seated rigidly on the couch, while my father stood near the table as if he needed support to stay upright. Sabrina sat beside them with a look of practiced worry, the kind of expression she used whenever she wanted sympathy before anyone heard a single word from her. My mother told me to sit her tone careful and distant, and my father said that they needed to address a situation they had been made aware of earlier in the week. Sabrina opened her phone and held up a series of screenshots that showed messages with my name attached. The sentences were cut in a way that made them appear suspicious, and several details looked edited, yet she presented them with confidence that left no room for hesitation. She said that she did not want to believe any of it, but she felt obligated to bring it to their attention because she cared about the family's reputation. The performance was smooth enough that anyone unfamiliar with her patterns would have believed it instantly. I tried to explain that the images were altered and that nothing on the screen reflected anything I had written, but each time I spoke, my father raised his hand, as if the sound of my voice disrupted something he needed to hold together. My mother asked me why I would send messages like that if I had nothing to hide, and Sabrina leaned forward with concern that felt rehearsed. She said that she only wanted to protect them from disappointment and that she hoped they would not blame her for trying to be responsible. Every sentence she offered strengthened the idea that I had something to confess. I told my parents to look at the edges of the screenshots because the timestamps had been distorted, and several letters did not align with the rest of the text. My father did not examine any of it. Instead, he asked me a question that cut through the room as if it had already been waiting for its moment to land. He said, "Why would your sister lie about something like this?" The implication inside that question removed every possibility of fairness, and I realized that the decision had been made long before they invited me into the room. My mother stood and walked toward the hallway as if she could no longer stay near me. She asked my father what he wanted to do, and he answered without hesitation. He looked directly at me and said the words that still echo clearly no matter how many years have passed. Dad said, "Pack your things. You're not staying under my roof tonight." The sentence delivered a finality I had never imagined hearing from him. I went upstairs in silence and gathered a few clothes, my camera, and the small box where I kept personal items that meant more to me than anything else I owned. I did not cry, because shock filled every space where fear should have been. When I reached the front door, Sabrina stood near the hallway pretending to be upset, yet her eyes revealed a satisfaction that she could not fully hide. My father opened the door without looking at me. I stepped outside carrying a backpack that felt too light for someone being pushed out of her own home. The door closed behind me with a sound that ended a childhood I had never been allowed to fully claim. A week after I had been forced out of the only home I had ever known, I finally understood what it meant to rely on myself even when I was still too young to grasp how heavy that responsibility could become. The first person who helped me stay grounded during that period was my best friend Ava, who asked no questions when she realized I was avoiding going back to my house. She simply opened her door and told me to rest, and the exhaustion I had been carrying made it impossible to decline. I stayed with her for a few days while trying to decide what my next step should be, and although she offered comfort, I knew I could not remain there much longer because her parents had strict rules about guests. I spent that time trying to calm my mind enough to think clearly, yet each hour reminded me of how quickly my life had changed. Keaton. My mentor noticed something was wrong the moment I returned to school. She had always been perceptive, yet her expression tightened when she asked if everything was all right. I tried to deflect the question, but she was too patient to let the conversation end there. When she pressed gently, the truth slipped out before I had time to prepare for how she might react. She did not ask for every detail, nor did she show shock the way I expected. She placed her hand on my shoulder and told me she would not let me fall through the cracks, simply because the adults responsible for me had chosen not to see what was happening. That afternoon, Keaton made an offer that shifted the path of my life. She explained that she had an extra room in her small apartment, and if I was comfortable with it, I could stay with her until a more stable solution presented itself. Her voice carried a calm certainty that made it easier to breathe, and although I hesitated because I did not want to become a burden, she assured me that she would not have suggested it if she felt otherwise. I moved in that evening, and the relief of having a safe place to sleep made everything feel slightly less impossible. Keaton allowed me to spend time in her studio after school, and she treated me like a student whose talent deserved to be developed, rather than a child who needed supervision. She taught me how to work with portrait lighting and how to read shadows on a subject's face, so the final image held depth that could not be faked. She demonstrated how to photograph small events with an awareness of timing that captured genuine emotion instead of stiff poses that felt rehearsed. When she guided me through color correction software, she explained each adjustment with a level of clarity that made me realize how much I wanted to master every part of the process. As the weeks passed, she introduced me to small opportunities that allowed me to earn modest income. At first, she invited me to assist during weekend sessions, where families wanted simple portraits. Later, she encouraged me to try photographing school events, which paid enough to help me save a little money for supplies. I had never expected to earn anything from something I loved, and each small job reinforced the belief that I could shape a life different from the one my parents had envisioned for me. Emotionally, the transition was not simple. The rumors Sabrina had created still lingered in conversations around school, and I occasionally overheard comments that made my stomach tighten, yet those moments felt less powerful as time moved forward. Keaton's steady confidence in my potential helped rebuild the parts of me that had been shaken loose when I was told to leave home. I learned how to hold a camera with more intention, how to adjust my posture for long hours of work, and how to trust that my artistic instincts were not flaws that needed to be hidden. Living with Keaton taught me stability that did not rely on approval from people who viewed me through the lens of someone else's narrative. The studio became a space where I could regain control over the direction my life was heading, and the sense of purpose I found there softened the impact of everything I had lost. Even when the world felt uncertain, the work in front of me offered a structure that steadied my thoughts. I did not know it yet, but those early months would become the foundation for every milestone I achieved later in life. 12 years after the night I lost my home, something shifted in my life in a way I had not anticipated, although I believed I had already rebuilt myself from the ground up. My studio in Atlanta had grown from a small corner workspace into a place that attracted clients who valued expression as much as technique, and my schedule was filled with portrait sessions, event shoots, and consultation meetings that often lasted until the evening hours. I enjoyed the rhythm of it, not because it proved anything to anyone, but because it felt like the life I had once imagined during the years when everything felt uncertain. The shift began when a local magazine contacted me for an interview about young creatives shaping the artistic landscape of the city. I hesitated at first, since attention had never been something I chased, yet the editor spoke with genuine interest and asked thoughtful questions about the challenges that shaped my artistic style. The article came out the following month, with a full spread describing my journey, the philosophy behind my work, and the growing influence of the studio. It highlighted the way I guided clients through sessions rather than posing them rigidly, and it discussed the workshops I had begun offering for students who lacked resources. The story circulated quickly, appearing on several online platforms, and within a week, my calendar became fully booked. The last thing I expected during that busy period was a message from Mom. I had not heard her voice or seen her handwriting since the night I packed a small bag and stepped into the cold, with no idea of where I would sleep. The message came through email rather than the phone, as if she could hide behind the distance of a typed sentence. She wrote that she had seen the article, followed by a line claiming she had always believed I would find my path. I read the message 3 times, trying to understand the intention behind it, because nothing about it resembled the woman who once turned away when I needed her most. Before I replied, I received another message, this time from Dad. His tone mirrored hers so closely that I wondered whether they had drafted their messages together. He mentioned pride as if it had always been present, although every memory I held told a very different story. My reaction was a mixture of confusion and caution, because reaching out after 12 years of silence required a motive. I did not have to wait long to find out what it was. They asked to speak with me over the phone. I agreed only because I wanted to hear their voices directly and understand what had prompted such sudden interest. When the call connected, neither of them offered an apology or attempted to address the years between us. Instead, the first thing they said was the sentence that pulled me backward in time so violently that I lost my breath. They said the first thing they said wasn't "congratulations" or "sorry." It was a demand for money. The words sounded rehearsed, almost practiced, as if acknowledging my success mattered only through the lens of what they could request from me. I listened without interrupting, waiting for any indication that they understood what they had done all those years ago. No such moment appeared. They spoke about financial strain, medical bills, and responsibilities they claimed had become overwhelming. They insisted that families should support each other, overlooking the way they had abandoned me when I had no one. Their expectations rested on the belief that I would feel obligated to step in simply because success had finally come my way. When the call ended, I sat in silence, not from shock, but from clarity. Their motives had nothing to do with reconciliation. They saw an opportunity, not a daughter. That weekend, I returned to the house where I had spent my childhood, although nothing about it felt familiar anymore. The walkway looked unchanged. The front steps still creaked when I stepped on it. Yet the silence inside carried a weight that told me this visit would not resemble any version of home that I once imagined. My parents opened the door without hesitation. However, their expressions held none of the warmth that other families might have shared after a long separation. There were no hugs or greetings filled with relief. There was only a quiet acknowledgement that something unavoidable needed to be said. Mom gestured for me to sit at the dining table. Dad remained standing behind her chair, as if unsure whether he should treat me as a guest or as someone who had crossed a boundary simply by returning. I took a seat because resisting the moment would not have changed anything. The air between us felt strained, yet I waited for them to explain why they had contacted me after so many years of silence. The conversation began slowly, almost cautiously, as if they needed time to gather the courage to speak truths they had buried for more than a decade. Mom was the first to admit that they had known for years that the rumors Sabrina created were false. She spoke carefully, yet her voice carried a tremor that suggested she understood how much damage their inaction had caused. Dad added that they had discovered the truth shortly after I left, and that Sabrina eventually admitted to fabricating the messages and altering images to make her lies believable. They did not try to defend their choices, although their hesitation revealed that they still believed silence had been the safer option at the time. They explained that Sabrina had been dismissed from her university program due to academic dishonesty. According to them, she had attempted to manipulate coursework in a way that mirrored the behavior she practiced at home. Her expulsion triggered a chain of consequences that neither of them had expected. She struggled to find another program that would accept her, and the disappointment continued to escalate within their household. While I listened without interrupting, I found no comfort in the idea that the truth had eventually caught up with her, because nothing about it repaired the choices that had shaped my life. My parents then shifted the discussion toward the situation they currently faced. They had both lost their jobs within a short period of time, and debts accumulated faster than they could manage. The house required repairs they could not afford, and the little savings they once had disappeared as they tried to keep everything from collapsing. Their voices softened as they spoke, and I recognized that desperation had guided their decision to contact me. The realization did not surprise me, yet hearing it spoken aloud carried a finality that made the room feel even heavier. They asked whether I could help them regain stability. They mentioned the success of my studio in Atlanta, the magazine features, and the clients who trusted my work. Their request revealed exactly what they hoped for, because they believed my success placed some kind of obligation on me. They waited for an answer that would lighten their burdens. I looked at Mom and Dad without bitterness yet, with a clarity I had not possessed as a child. I said, "You made your choices. Now you live with them." The words left my mouth steadily because I understood that compassion did not require surrendering the boundaries I had built to survive. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to quiet resignation, but I knew that this moment needed honesty rather than comfort. I stood up, thanked them for speaking openly, and prepared to walk away from the house that had once pushed me out. There was nothing left for me to repair because the pieces they had broken belonged to a past I no longer carried. A few quiet weeks passed before something unexpected reached my doorstep. A few months after that meeting, a letter appeared in my mailbox. The envelope held my sister's apology written in a shaky script that revealed more about her turmoil than the words she chose. Sabrina claimed she had carried guilt for years, yet her admission felt distant and incomplete, as if she wanted relief rather than reconciliation. I read every line once, then folded the paper and placed it back inside the envelope without writing a response. Silence felt like the only truthful answer I could give. Life in Atlanta continued to expand in directions I had once only imagined. My studio grew into a space that welcomed young creatives who reminded me of the determination I clung to during the early years. I invested in better equipment and built programs that taught portrait techniques, event coverage, and editing foundations. Students arrived with uncertainty and left with confidence, which became one of the most meaningful parts of my work. The atmosphere inside the studio shifted as each new class transformed it into a place where people discovered their voice through the lens rather than through approval from anyone at home. News about my parents reached me through neighbors who still lived near the house I once shared with them. They had lost the property after a series of financial setbacks and moved into a small apartment that barely held the remains of their old life. I felt no triumph in hearing it, only a quiet ache that surfaced whenever I remembered how desperately I used to try to win their understanding. Time had reshaped those memories into distant echoes, and I no longer felt obligated to reopen wounds that healing had already sealed. Growth surrounded me in ways I could feel every morning when I stepped into the studio before the first student arrived. The early light filtered across the backdrop walls, and even the silence held a sense of possibility. I understood that rebuilding my life had never been about proving anything to the people who abandoned me. It had always been about honoring the version of myself who survived their indifference. That realization steadied me whenever doubt attempted to creep back into my thoughts. One evening, I sat by the window of my apartment overlooking the city. Cars moved slowly along the streets below their headlights, stretching into soft reflections on the pavement. I thought about everything I had created without the family I once believed I needed. The distance between us no longer felt like punishment. It felt like clarity. I had offered myself a new beginning, one that did not require permission or validation from those who had failed to protect me when I was most vulnerable. My voice emerged from that understanding with a strength that surprised even me. I decided that my story no longer included Sabrina or my parents. Their absence felt cleaner than their presence ever had, and choosing not to reconnect allowed me to remain loyal to the peace I had worked so hard to build. I closed the curtains, exhaled slowly, and understood that some endings are necessary even when they arrive quietly. Family can wound us in ways that reach deeper than any outsider can understand, yet healing does not require returning to the place where the damage began. Forgiveness becomes meaningful only when it frees the heart, rather than binding it to old patterns of hurt. We choose our future by honoring our worth, not by chasing approval from those who refuse to see it. Walking away can be an act of love toward the self we fought to protect. Thank you for staying with me until the final page of this journey. Your presence means more than you know. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. What would you do if you were in my position? There is no right or wrong answer, only perspective shaped by experience. Share your view in the comments so we can continue the conversation together.